Shalom, everybody. And this is the start of session number 5. And we're doing a weekend seminar on the subject of the Elijah ministry and message. And what we've done in the first 4 sessions is we've taken the subject of the Elijah ministry and message, and we're breaking it down into its component parts. And so the first part was the general call to return to the Torah and keep the statutes and judgments of the Torah, and understand that the primary calling of the ministry and message of Elijah is to call Yah's people out of mixed worship. Then we went to the second level of the Elijah ministry and message, and Elijah is seen in the Hebraic culture as one of the 2 witnesses, along with Moses, of the biblical wedding. And so it's the Torah, which is personified by Moses, and the prophets, which is personified by Elijah, and the following of the Torah and the prophets through the Holy Spirit that prepares the bride for her bridegroom. And the bridegroom is King Messiah, who is Yeshua. And so in preparing the bride for the coming of King Messiah, the role and the task of King Messiah is to end the exile of his people, and that is northern kingdom and southern kingdom. The northern kingdom called the house of Joseph, the southern kingdom the house of Judah. And there's a prophecy about the ending of their exile and their reunification. It's Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 15 to 24. It's the prophecy about the 2 sticks becoming one. And in ending the exile, primarily the Messiah is going to take his people back to the mountains of Israel. And the mountains of Israel is Jerusalem, and it includes what is biblically called Judea and Samaria, which the Western world calls the West Bank. And so the Jewish people, it's been possible for them to return to the land of Israel since there became a state of Israel in 1948. However, the house of Joseph, or the northern kingdom, who is the non-Jewish part of the family of Jacob, they do not at this time have an opportunity to return to the land of Israel. And so when we look at the Exodus from Egypt as a prophetic foreshadowing of King Messiah ending the exile of his people, we are told in Exodus in chapter 50 and verses 24 and 25, Joseph said to his brethren, I die, and Elohiym will surely visit you. See that word surely? In the Hebrew, the word for visit is going to be repeated. And so the English translation, in order to amplify the repeat, says surely. So it says in the Hebrew, I will visit you. Now, actually, this word visit becomes a code word for the redemption or the end of the exile. So there was an exile in Egypt, and then there's an exile in all the nations of the world. And I will surely visit you and bring you out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And Joseph or Yosef took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, Yah will surely visit you. Look at that. It's doubled in verse 24, and now it's doubled in verse 25. And so, like, this is very significant, very important. And you will carry my bones up from here. And so the emphasis is on Yah is going to do it. The language of it is he's going to visit you, and it's has a purpose of bringing Joseph's bones back to the land. So now, when actually it was the Malach of Yahweh that appears to Moses at the burning bush. And we see this in Exodus in chapter 3 in verse 2. The King James English reads, And the angel of Yah appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Now, when we're reading this in English and we read the word angel, we would normally think of the angelic class. We know of Gabriel and Michael being of the angelic class, but this word translated as angel is the word malach, which means a messenger. So the word that got translated as angel in Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, is the same word in Malachi in chapter 3 and verse 1. Let's remind ourselves of Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Behold, I will send my messenger. That word messenger is malach. So in Malachi 3:1, it's translated as messenger, but in Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, it's translated as angel. So a malach is a messenger, and an angel is a messenger. So that's why it can be translated as angel, because an angel is a messenger, but not all messengers are angels. So we have John the Baptist, Yochanan the Immerser, is called a messenger. But let me show you this. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 1 and verse 7. And now, O ye priests, this commandment is for you. Verse 7. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the Torah at his mouth, for he is the malach of Yahweh of hosts. So the teachers of the Torah, the priests, they are called malach. John the Baptist is called malach. And the one that's speaking to Moses at the burning bush is called malach. So we have in Acts chapter 7 a reference to what's happening in Exodus in chapter 3 and verse 2. So actually what I'm doing here is I'm giving a little elaboration on level number 2 of the Elijah message and ministry before we continue on level number 3, okay? I'm giving you some detail I didn't give you before. All right, so Acts chapter 7, in verse 30, it says, When 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of Yah in a flame of fire in a bush. It's repeated at the end of Acts chapter 7, verse 35, by the hand of the angel that appeared to him in the bush, messenger. Now we have verse 38. It says, the angel, the messenger which spoke to him at Mount Sinai. Acts chapter 7, verse 38 says, the one that spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, the same one that gave the Torah, the same one that gave the 10 commandments, is a malach. We've been trained to think in traditional Christianity, it was who we call God the Father that was speaking to Moses, and God the Father gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. so God the Father desired for it to be given, but it was given through his messenger, who appeared to Moses at the burning bush. And so then the messenger in Exodus in chapter 3, who we would understand to be Yeshua the Messiah, he says in Exodus chapter 3, verse 12, certainly I will be with you, and this will be a sign unto you that I have sent you. When you have brought forth the people out of Egypt, you will serve Elohiym upon the mountain. And so Moses said, well, they're going to ask, what's your name? And what is the name that I should tell them? In Exodus 3:14, Elohiym said to Moses, I am that I am. You shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me unto you. And Elohiym, moreover, said to Moses, you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the Elohiym of Abraham, the Elohiym of Yitzhak, the Elohiym of Yaakov, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial for all generations. So who's speaking this to Moses? The Malak. And who did the Malak say that he is? He's the Elohiym of Abraham, the Elohiym of Yitzhak, the Elohiym of Yaakov. And he said, that is how I want to be remembered forever, that I am the Elohiym of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. In other words, I am the one that made covenant with Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. So then in Exodus in chapter 3, verse 16, it says, go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Yahweh Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov appeared unto me, and this is what he told me to tell you. I have surely visited you. There's the word repeated. I have visited you. And that was what Joseph said that the Almighty would do. So now Moses is given the code word to the elders of Israel that they were supposed to remember from the words of Joseph. And so in one aspect, the Exodus from Egypt. All right, so who is Joseph's bones today? Joseph is the non-Jewish believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, and they're commonly called Christians. And so there's a principle that he's going to bring back a remnant, a remnant, a remnant, a remnant. So does that mean 100% of people who believe that Yeshua is the Messiah is going to end up returning to? The answer is no, because not all the descendants of Jacob came out of Egypt. It was only those that put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. And the scriptures do say in the rabbinical commentary, it was 20%. So I don't know whether it was. Point is, it's a remnant, and that is going to be repeated. And so Yeshua made reference to those that return. He called them wise virgins. To those that are not going to return, he called them foolish virgins. And so it is the part of the task of the ministry of the spirit of Elijah to make Yah's people particularly the bride of Yeshua, aware that her bridegroom is coming to end the exile, which means he's coming to end her exile. And the prophecy about the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37, after verses 15 to 17, where the instruction given to Ezekiel was to take the two sticks and make them one, the prophecy about the prophecy is that the prophecy wouldn't be understood, or the prophecy would have to be explained. So in Ezekiel 37, verse 18, it says, when the children of your people shall speak unto you, saying, will you not show us what you mean by this? So that's a prophecy about the prophecy. And so the prophecy is the people's going to say, I don't understand it. You have to explain this to me. I don't know what you mean, two sticks becoming one. So how does this relate and pertain to me? And so the explaining of this is a part of the Elijah ministry and message. And the ultimate outcome is Ezekiel 37, verses 21 and 22. Thus says Yahweh Elohiym, I'm going to take the children of Israel from among the nations where they be gone. I'm going to gather them on every side. I'm going to bring them into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. There will no more be two nations, neither shall be they divided into two kingdoms any more at all. You have one king over them, and in verse 24 it says they're going to have one shepherd over them, one king and one shepherd. Who do we understand is that king and shepherd? That is Yeshua the Messiah. And when are they going to have one king and one shepherd over them? When their exile ends and when they're united. And so it is through this event that Yeshua gets glorified. He gets recognized that he's the Messiah when he does this task. So Orthodox Judaism today, one of the criteria that they're looking for in the coming of the Messiah and the coming of King Messiah is King Messiah is going to end the exile. All right, so explaining how the two sticks are becoming one and that Messiah is coming to end the exile is the second level of the ministry and message of Elijah. And we've been talking the last couple sessions about the third level of the ministry and the message of Elijah. And that is how the Elijah message is linked and associated with Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And so in learning and understanding how that is so, we see that that is linked and associated with the Jews that lived in and around the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And we refer to them as the Qumran community. So then, in order to understand how the Elijah ministry and message of Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 is linked and related to the Jews who we had to look at the historical and cultural context of what we're trying to understand, which is the New Testament, and who they are and what they're doing there is related and connected back to after Israel committed the sin of the golden calf, that then the Levitical priesthood with Aaron and his sons as high priest was established by the God of Israel. And he established it by decree. So therefore, there's going to be a test within Israel whether Israel is going to be faithful to following that decree. So initially it was Aaron and his four sons, but Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire. And so there was no high priest that came from them. So the high priests only came from the line of Aaron's other two sons, Ithamar and Eleazar. And we see that Eli, the priest, was of the line of Ithamar, and he was a priest when the children of Israel had crossed into the promised land, and the tabernacle was at Shiloh for a number of years. But because he did not discipline his sons, in other words, it's a picture of a corrupt priesthood. There was a judgment on that corrupt priesthood. So Yah sent a prophet and said that the line of Ithamar was going to become no more. And that actually did not come to pass until the days of David, and David was at the end of his life. And from the events that happened there, which we've explained. And then when David dies, Solomon becomes king, and Solomon builds the temple. So when Solomon becomes king, Zadok was the priest when Solomon became king. And there was a prophecy in the Torah that was made to Phinehas or Pinhas that he would have an eternal priesthood. He is a son of Eleazar, so the eternal priesthood would go through that line. Zadok is of the line of Phinehas, so the eternal priesthood is now it's a filter. It was Aaron's 4 sons. It got filtered down to 2 sons. It gets filtered down to 1 son. It gets filtered down to 1 son, and then 1 family within that, and that is going to be the Zadok family. That's going to be the Zadok line. And so from the time that Zadok was the priest under Solomon, all the high priests in Israel, from then until the time of the 2nd century, when the Greek Seleucids had come to power, all the high priests in Israel were Zadok priests. But in the 2nd century BC, around 175 BC, is when we have the corruption of the temple, we have the corruption of Jerusalem, we have the corruption of the high priesthood through the influence of the Greek Seleucids. And they are actually successful in their corruption, and they remove the Zadok priests as being the priests in Israel, and there become then the office of the high priesthood was taken up by Levites who were not of the line of Zadok the priest, and these were the Maccabean or the Hasmoneans, and they served in that office until there was a civil war amongst them in succession, and that civil war resulted in King Herod and the Romans coming and removing them from their office. And then we have the Roman control of the high priesthood into the 1st century, into the days of Yeshua, and then we have the Roman corruption of the office of the high priesthood. And as a part of that corruption, the Sadducees come into the office of the priesthood in Israel, and we read about some of those things in the New Testament. So then from the corruption of the high priesthood, in looking to see the direction of what should be done, there were then the Zadok priests saw from Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, where it says that it's in the Arava, which is a geographical location in Israel, is where there's supposed to be a preparation for the coming of King Messiah. So they go there, they establish a community, they preserve the priesthood and what was being done in the priesthood in that Qumran community. And then ultimately, we then come to the pages of the New Testament where the 4 Gospels in the beginning are telling us about the ministry of John the Baptist or Yochanan the Immerser, and he says he has a ministry of Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, and he's directly linking himself to the Jews that lived in the Qumran under the Zadok priests. And then fundamentally, from the time the Qumran community was started is where we have the beginning of the emergence historically of the Pharisees. So the Pharisaic sect came out from and a result of the Babylonian captivity. And the Pharisaic sect, which we read about in the New Testament, they're not called Pharisees today. They're how we refer to them has been changed, and instead they're called Orthodox Jews or Orthodox Judaism. So the fundamental doctrines and beliefs of Orthodox Judaism is the same doctrinal beliefs of the Pharisees. And so in this religious dispute amongst the Jewish people that had been going on for approximately 175 years, the three major groups of Jews in the dispute are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Jews of the Qumran community headed by the Zadok priests. And there was fundamentally two issues of disagreement. And the issue is over authority and the proper interpretation of the Torah. And the authority issue is centered upon the office fundamentally of the high priesthood, because as we read in Malachi, that the priests are the messengers of Yahweh of hosts. The teaching of Torah is supposed to come from the priesthood. And so they've been given that duty. And so they have the authority of that office to teach the Torah. And in teaching the Torah, coming from the authority of the office, is to tell Israel when you're supposed to keep the biblical festivals. So their office was challenged by the Pharisees. And so what they challenged was the authority that was, according to Torah, the authority was given to the office of the high priesthood, but the Pharisees are claiming the authority of the office of the high priesthood, and they're claiming that they have the authority to teach the Torah and to proclaim the festivals, and they're claiming their authority based upon Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 11. So now, in order to further understand the religious conflict and the importance and the significance and the context of the ministry of John the Baptist, Yochanan the Immerser, coming in the spirit and the power of Elijah, and then Yeshua arriving on the scene and what he had to say about the various things, because he did, and it's recorded for us. We need to understand two things. We needed to understand what the Pharisees believe, and we needed to understand what the Jews in the Dead Sea area, what they believe, and we know that through the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So why I'm kind of sort of like going to leave out the Sadducees is because they kind of like got fired when the temple got destroyed, and so like they and their voice is not around today. Okay, so what we have left predominantly before us is the Pharisaic sect, which they have been the leaders of the Jewish people that don't believe that Yeshua is the Messiah from the destruction of the temple. They've been the voice that's been leading the Jewish people. So God has primarily used them to preserve and to keep the Jews that don't believe in Yeshua as the Messiah. But then the Jews that did believe that Yeshua was the Messiah predominantly are the Jews of the Qumran, and their initial names that are mentioned in the book of Acts, they were called the Way, and they were also called the Nazarenes. And now, if you study the history of the Nazarenes and what some of the church fathers, the quote-unquote church fathers, the Greco-Roman church fathers had to say about the Nazarenes, we have history of them being a group into the 4th century. And we're told by the church fathers that the Nazarenes, the Jewish believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, they kept the Torah. They kept the Sabbath. They kept the festivals. They circumcised their children. They spoke Hebrew while believing that Yeshua is the Messiah. But because of the events that happened in the land of Israel, primarily the Jewish revolts, and ultimately the final Jewish revolt, which was in 135 AD, that Rabbi Akiva, a prominent rabbi of the Pharisees, proclaimed Bar Kokhba, who was the military leader of the Jews that was to fight against Rome, as the Messiah. And Rome then defeated the uprising. And because the Jews that believed in Yeshua as the Messiah did not believe that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, as Rabbi Akiva said, they did not participate in the rebellion against Rome. They fled to Pella. And so this began a process of separation. And Hadrian, after the Jewish revolt, made a decree that Jews aren't allowed to be in Jerusalem. And so up until that time, the leadership in Jerusalem that believed that Yeshua was the Messiah, they were all Jewish. But then it started to be that they became non-Jewish. And then Rome, they treated the Jews, because of the various rebellions that the Romans were victorious in putting down. In order to teach the Jews a lesson, the Romans made the Jews second-class citizens in the Roman Empire. And so initially Rome was persecuting the Jews, and Rome was persecuting the believers in Yeshua as the Messiah. But there came a point in time when, and this was with Constantine in 321 AD, that events transpired where Constantine declares that Christianity is the state religion of Rome. And so now there has to be consolidation within Rome of religious belief regarding Yeshua. And so they began to have meetings to sort through various issues. And one of the first meetings was in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. And at the Council of Nicaea, the Nazarenes, the Jewish believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, were not permitted to come to the Council of Nicaea. It was just the non-Jewish leadership that was there. And it was there that they to change the roots that came down from the Jewish believers, from the way, from the Nazarenes, beginning in Acts chapter 2, beginning in Jerusalem. And there, Council of Nicaea, they said, we're going on a different calendar. Okay, so they came up with this formula and said, we're going to celebrate Easter instead of Passover. And this is the formula for Easter. So that formula is still being followed today by the Catholic Church and by most of the Protestant world. They're celebrating according to that calendar that came from Rome, saying that Christianity is the state religion. So that which was from the beginning has gotten corrupted. So therefore, it needs to be restored to how it was back in the beginning. And the proclamation of that restoration is a part of the ministry and the message of Elijah before Messiah comes. And that is a part of the restoration of all things. And so for that reason, this particular aspect of what I just described to you of the history needs to be shared within the churches to make them aware of what was done, and that the ministry and message of Elijah is here to call them back to the roots of their faith, the Jewish roots of their faith, to call the church today to identify with the first Jewish believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, but also within the Messianic Hebraic roots movement to do the exact same thing, for them to come to identify with the Jewish roots of their faith in Messiah. And the Jewish roots is found in the people of the way. The Jewish roots is found in the Nazarenes, which is associated with the Elijah ministry and message of Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. So that is why I said earlier in these sessions that even in this movement, we have not fully returned to the Jewish roots of our faith. And those roots are found in Jerusalem. Those roots are found in Acts chapter 2. Those roots are found in the 3,000 Jews that were the first believers in Yeshua as the Messiah. And they established an assembly, a congregation, believing in Yeshua as the Messiah in Jerusalem. And that congregation was headed by James. And what was the title that James had? He was called a bishop. Okay, are you aware in Orthodox Judaism there's any title called a bishop? Well, where'd the title come from? The overseers in the Qumran community under the leadership of the Zadok priest, they're called overseers, they're called bishops. That's a title that comes from the community in the Dead Sea. And so it's a little hint for you, just by having the title of bishop, that there's a connection there to the Qumran community. Okay, so there's a religious dispute. And we're trying to understand the religious dispute. And what Yah is drawing us back to is, and I mentioned this earlier, so this is a repeat of something I've said earlier. And that is, in this process, Yah was speaking to us while we were in the church. And he was calling us to come out of that church system. So we've come out of that church system to learn the Torah. And so now in learning the Torah, he wants us to take that knowledge and understanding of the Torah so that we can now understand the New Testament, because when we were in the church without the Torah, we didn't understand the New Testament. So now, instead of solely focusing so diligently on the weekly Torah portion, the weekly Torah portion, the weekly Torah portion, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we still need to study and learn it. However, we also, he's drawing us back to taking what we've learned to help us to better understand the New Testament. And then from understanding the New Testament, that message of the Torah in the New Testament now has to be rebroadcast back into the churches. And we're a part of the people that are to do that. And so we're to make them aware that they departed from their roots through the Greco-Roman influence in the Council of Nicaea, and to call them back. So in order for us now to understand this Jewish dispute, we need to understand what both sides believed. So I'm going to now begin by explaining some of the Pharisaic beliefs, because their beliefs come into play as we're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Their beliefs come into play as we're reading the book of Acts. And so fundamentally, the Pharisees, who are Orthodox Jews today, they claim their authority, and the administration of their authority is through a judicial court that they set up, which is called the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin had on it those that were Sadducees and those that were Pharisees. In the Qumran community, under the leadership of the Zadok priests, they had to administer Torah rulings and judicial things. And so they had their own administrative process to handle issues regarding the Torah and following the Torah. So we have these two different systems. So in the Pharisaic system, in the Sanhedrin system, they claim that they have authority to declare when the festivals are, and they say it's supposed to be followed according to the calendar that is the same calendar that was followed when the Jews went to Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. So what is called today as the Jewish calendar, and then others called the Jewish calendar God's calendar or the biblical calendar or the Torah calendar, it has Babylonian month names named after Babylonian gods. And I was shocked one day. This was about February of 2021. A thought occurred to me as I'm in front of my computer is do a Google search on Babylonian calendar. And the reason why I didn't know what I was going to find is because I'd never heard anybody in the church world or anybody in this movement ever say, I'm going to give you a teaching today on the Babylonian calendar. So I hadn't been exposed to it. I never heard anybody teach it or mention it. So I didn't know fully what I was going to find. And so when I came up and the articles came up and said, well, this is the Babylonian calendar. It operates and functions this way. I was absolutely totally shocked because it described what is presently called the Jewish calendar, which people even in this movement say is the biblical calendar, is the Torah calendar, that is a God's calendar. So in describing the Babylonian calendar, and there's many web pages out there where you can read about what the Babylonian calendar is. Among them is, like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, and so one of the places that's got an article on it is Wikipedia Encyclopedia. And so they say in Babylon, we have the sighting of the moon. And when you sight the moon, that becomes the first day of the next month. And that is the Babylonian practice. Well, that's exactly how people were saying about how when the new moon comes, from the Pharisaic practice, people today say, well, now that's the first day of the month. Okay, so that is exactly how the new month and the first day of the month happened in Babylon. Furthermore, if you look up Babylonian calendar, it says when you sighted that new moon, and then you had the first day of the next month, it says 7 days after that was a special day. And so we have those, although they're a minority, we have those in the movement I've heard over the years where they say, we're doing the Sabbath wrong. We should be doing lunar Sabbath. Well, what is lunar Sabbath? That is when the month starts, day one of the next month. You count 7 days, and that's your Sabbath, lunar Sabbath. And so we are told in the Torah that we're to celebrate the new moon. That's not even an issue. And so the new moon is a festival. So it's not an issue about whether you celebrate or keep the new moon or not, because you're supposed to. The issue is when that new moon comes, is that the first day of the next month? So no debate about whether you should observe the new moon. It's just when the new moon comes, am I going to say it's the first day of the next month? And so the Babylonian calendar system says yes. And so the Pharisees brought this system from the Babylonian captivity when there came a point in time when the people being in Babylon, you see, the preservation of the Jewish people themselves is at risk. And so they're used to having Jerusalem and the temple, and the priests teach them. But wait, the temple is destroyed. So how are we going to survive as a people? How are we not going to be mixed in with the people like what happened with the northern kingdom? And So that's where the idea arose that we're going to have local meetings. It's called a synagogue. Well, who's going to teach the Torah in the local synagogue? It ain't going to be the priests. So there were people that studied and learned the Torah that arose, that was respected among the people, and they became the teachers in the local synagogue. And what's the name that they eventually became known by? They were known by rabbis. The rabbis were the teachers in the synagogue in the process of time. So it's actually the Pharisees who ended up writing down their teachings and their rulings, and we have it available for us today. It's called the Talmud. And the major part of the Talmud is called the Babylonian Talmud. And the minor part of it is called the Jerusalem Talmud. But the major part of the Talmud comes from and was written in Babylon. So when the Pharisees explain their history, there's not a whole lot prior to Hillel and Shammai. Modern Judaism is going to describe their understandings as we go back 2,000 years through the Pharisaic schools of Hillel and Shammai. Now, was there existence before Hillel and Shammai of Pharisees? Yes. So Hillel and Shammai didn't begin the Pharisaic sect, but they became the prominent leaders, particularly as we get to the first century. So the Talmud isn't going to tell us the prominent leader of the Pharisees in the 3rd century. They're not going to tell us the prominent leaders in 175 BC. Okay, but they're going to tell us about the debates of Hillel and Shammai. So this Jewish dispute of the 1st century, we can study it today. It's been preserved for us today. On the Pharisaic side, it's called the Talmud. And on the Jewish believer side, it's called the New Testament. So the different views of the religious dispute and how they saw things and viewed things, the New Testament is written from a particular perspective. It was from the Jews that believed in Yeshua as the Messiah. Where the Jews that didn't believe in Yeshua as Messiah, they're telling you how things was from an alternative perspective, the Talmud. So what's happened as primarily non-Jews are coming out of the church system, and they're realizing they should keep the Sabbath, the festivals, follow the Torah, and they're looking for direction. And of course, they don't got that direction in the church system. So what's left to them? Judaism. So what they end up doing is they ended up studying and learning the belief system of the Pharisees. So I believe that it was Yah's will and plan that it was how the journey went, because they have preserved for us a number of things that we need to know and understand. The culture and customs of things they have preserved, and we need to know and understand those things. They've preserved for us the understanding of Hebrew and the things in the scriptures that can be drawn out and gleaned from the Hebrew. So they are important to us in our walk and in our understanding of Torah. But the question is, even though they're important and they're very helpful to help us in our understanding, the question is, are they the roots of our faith? Or is the first Jewish believers the roots of our faith? And so God has had us pass through learning the things of the Pharisees, but we're not supposed to camp and end there. We're supposed to continue on and learn and understand what the Jews who came out of the Qumran, where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they teach and believe, and what we can learn from them as well. So they were the influencers in the 1st century and ultimately gave us our New Testament. But in the process of time, they got lost. And after the 4th century, we don't have those Jewish believers leading, guiding us, and teaching us and helping us to understand the Torah and Hebrew. They get lost. And so it's easy today to not have a connection with them because they're not here. You might ask, well, what about Messianic Jews? You know, Jews that say that they believe in Yeshua as the Messiah. Well, I don't know if you thought about how Messianic Jews today express their faith, but they do embrace the church teaching of dispensationalism, age of law, age of grace. And their viewpoint is that does pertain to the non-Jew. And that's what the non-Jew is supposed to do, is to continue in age of law, age of grace, and keep Christmas and Easter. And they are trying to be recognized within the Jewish community and respected as Jewish believers within the Jewish community, okay? And so that's a major fight, is to get that respect, to get the acceptance. But who's the Jews that they're trying to get the acceptance from? The Pharisees. And so they're trying to get the acceptance of the religious Pharisees, called Orthodox Judaism today, and trying to get them to accept them. So what are they doing to try to get their acceptance? Do customs and things that the Pharisees do. So they are, in their mindset and their belief system, they are actually a mixture of things that they learned out of the Christian church. They are well aware of dispensationalism and age of law and age of grace. And so, you know, they teach a one new man. And their definition of one man is separate but equal. Separate but equal. We're Jews, we do it one way. You're non-Jews, you do it another way. So as non-Jews, you keep Christmas and Easter, you eat pig, and that's okay because, you know, you're not Jews. But keeping Torah is for us Jews. Now, we both believe in Yeshua as Messiah. We're supposed to respect one another, but we're separate, but we're equal. And by being separate by equal, by us eating pig and them not eating pig, that's what Messiah has made us, one in him. Pig eaters and not pig eaters. And they're trying to sell that as the doctrine of one new man. What I'm trying to say is, you know, I love my Messianic Jewish brethren, okay? They're part of the body of Messiah. I'm just saying is that they are not taking us back to our Jewish roots. Okay, so if we look to them for our Jewish roots, they ain't going to take you there. Who takes you there is the ministry and the message of Elijah. Okay, the ministry and the message of Elijah is Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, which is connected to the Qumran. So the Pharisees, Orthodox Judaism today, they claim their authority based upon Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 11. They claim their authority through a unique doctrine that is only of the Pharisaic sect. It's called the doctrine of oral Torah. So the doctrine of oral Torah was not a belief system of the Zadok priests in the Qumran. And if you believe those Zadok priests in the Qumran were an extension of originally Zadok the priest that was under Solomon and ruled in the days of Solomon, that means Zadok the priest under Solomon did not have a doctrine of oral Torah. And that would explain why the Zadok priests in the Qumran did not have a doctrine of oral Torah. So did the Sadducees have a doctrine of oral Torah? No, the Pharisees did. Did the Karaites have a doctrine of oral Torah? No, the Pharisees did. So, and then in their doctrine of oral Torah, they claim that that doctrine is the true doctrine of Torah that goes back to Mount Sinai. All right, so here's how they explain the doctrine of oral Torah, which is tied to their claim of authority. They say at Mount Sinai there were written commandments given, and those and commandments were given that there's no details regarding how you're to do them in the written Torah. And so they say that those details were given orally, in the oral understanding got faithfully without error transferred from generation to generation, from Moses to the rabbi today. And with the rabbi today, and what Orthodox Judaism believes and teaches today, they say is 100% the same as it was orally given at Mount Sinai. And so that's how they claim, and that's what that doctrine is. So then they say that the origin of the Torah came from heaven, from the Almighty, who we understand to be the messenger of Yah, to Moses. But then they say, once it was given to Moses, the administration of the Torah, the rulings of the Torah, and that is now on earth, and it's in the hands of men who study and learn and know the Torah, and the rulings of it is through majority vote, through democratic vote. And so this is how they understand doctrine of oral Torah, is that today we don't look to heaven for direction about how to follow the Torah. We look exclusively on earth to human beings who are studied, who are rabbis, and amongst the rabbis, if there's a disagreement, the ruling is according to majority vote. All right, so that doctrine is in conflict with the belief system and the teachings of the Jews in the Qumran under the Zadok priests. And it's a conflict with how they view the calendar, how they view the feast, because the Qumran community claimed and believed that the calendar that they were following, it originated from heaven. And it originally was given by the angel Uriel to Enoch. And Enoch passed it down ultimately to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But following it got lost in Egypt. So then when they came out of Egypt, they were given a calendar to command to get back on the calendar that was given to Enoch. And we have a calendar command while they're still in Egypt. Exodus chapter 12 and verse 2, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. Okay, so this was Yah trying to get Israel back onto divine time. So the question becomes, how was the family of Jacob, how were they keeping time under Pharaoh? Well, Pharaoh's timekeeping, Pharaoh's calendar was lunar. And Pharaoh's timekeeping and Pharaoh's calendar had 13 months. And Pharaoh's timekeeping, eventually, it was being practiced in Babylon. It was being practiced by Nebuchadnezzar. And Babylon kept time according to the lunar timing, according to 13 months in a year. On leap months, of course. And so that which was practiced in Babylon got picked up by the Persians. They followed the same method. That which got picked up by the Persians got picked up by Alexander the Great. He was following a calendar of 13 months. What was followed by Alexander the Great, he's called a Macedonian. was followed by the Greek Seleucids of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. That's the calendar system that they followed. And when the Greek Seleucids corrupted the temple system and the high priesthood, they brought that Greek timekeeping into the temple and took out the Zadok priests. Now, Yah had said in the Torah, don't be like the nations of the world. And this is how the nations of the world kept time. So if correct timekeeping is the lunar according to 13 months, then that means Pharaoh was correctly keeping time. Nebuchadnezzar was correctly keeping time. Alexander the Great was correctly keeping time. And Antiochus Epiphanes was correctly teaching time. He didn't change times and seasons. He was correctly keeping time. So no, the only unique way of keeping time that the nations of the world have never followed, never, is the priestly calendar in the Qumran, because it came from heaven. So now there was a dispute, and one part of the dispute was as a claim to be a heavenly origin of keeping time, keeping the festivals, that was claimed by the Zadok priests of the Qumran. Contrast, who did not look to heaven for direction about how to administer the Torah. It was done by majority vote of the rabbis. And so there is a famous story in the Talmud regarding this issue, and I have to paraphrase it, okay? You can look it up, but I got to paraphrase it. So a very highly respected rabbi of the day, Rabbi Eliezer, was in a dispute with the other rabbis. And it had something to do with an oven, okay? And so Rabbi Eliezer wanted to make the claim that his view was correct. And so he said, if my view is correct, let that big tree out there be uprooted. And in the account of the Talmud, it says at that moment in time, the tree got uprooted. And the rabbi said, we don't listen to trees being uprooted to determine, what the Torah says. So Rabbi Eliezer says, if I'm right, let the water run backwards. And the Talmud says at that point in time, the water ran backwards. And the rabbi said, we don't listen to water running backwards. And then Rabbi Eliezer said, now, if I'm right, let heaven itself say that I'm right. And the Talmud says at that point in time, there was a heavenly voice that said, Rabbi Eliezer is right. And the rabbis laughed and said, we don't listen to heavenly voices because it's long been determined that the Torah is not in heaven. That comes from Deuteronomy chapter 30. And I'm going to have to explain that more to you in detail. And so we have the doctrine of oral Torah, and then a doctrine, a significant doctrine is this, that the doctrine is that the Torah is not in heaven. I kind of lost track of time. How long have I gone so far? Has it been an hour? Hour. So, all right. So I got to do a little bit more and then go to session number 6. Okay. Because I really haven't got really deep into the Pharisaic beliefs. I'm just giving you the background of it. All right. So, here's where they derive that that teaching is Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 to 14. And the doctrine comes from taking out of context the first part of verse 12. So I'll read all the verses so you can get it in context. It's speaking about the Torah. And it says in verse 11, for the commandment which I command you this day, keeping the Torah, it's not hidden from you, neither is it far off. In keeping the Torah is not so hard that you have to go way up into the sky somewhere that you can't even see and look for it and figure out what the Torah says and understand how to follow the Torah from something way up in heaven that you can't even see. So it's not in heaven that you should say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring us down to us that we may hear it and do it. Furthermore, verse 13, the Torah is like way not at the bottom of the sea that you need to get someone to, go to the bottom of the sea and tell you what the Torah says and come deliver it to you. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who shall go over the sea for us to bring us that we may hear it and do it? No, the word is near to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart. It's not way up there. It's not way down there. It's here and here. So you can do it. So that's the context. So what the rabbis did, they took that little part of verse 12, it is not in heaven. And they said, we don't look to heaven for how to follow the Torah in the interpretation of the Torah after the Torah was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. All right. Furthermore, the Pharisees had a teaching that has been picked up by the Protestant churches that prophecy ended with Malachi. And so since prophecy ended with Malachi, there's no prophets in the present day and there's no prophecy in the present day. So have you ever thought how we got about what we call the Hebrew scriptures? The church calls it the Old Testament. Have you ever thought about how we got that those books is what we regard as our canon? Who made that decision? The decision got made after the temple got destroyed in 70 AD by the Pharisees. The Pharisees told us, and the Catholics don't agree, so they have other books, but the Protestants agree that this is the canon. Okay. So the Bible that we have, it was determined for us, at least the Hebrew scriptures, by the Pharisees, today Orthodox Jews. So they had the doctrine of oral Torah, and they had the doctrine of that the Torah interpretation and ruling that we're not to look to heaven, and that prophecy ended with Malachi. For that reason, those books that came about in 2nd century BC, which now we call the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha, those were not regarded by the Pharisees as canon material books. So when Yeshua was on earth, there wasn't a accepted what we would call canon. Now there was an agreement of scrolls that we look to as direction and guidance. There was a general agreement, but there was no absolute canon. So the Qumran community, they had a high regard and a high respect for First Enoch and Jubilees, among other things. And so they looked at what was said in First Enoch and Jubilees as a part of their guidance, as a part of their understanding, as a part of, their scriptures, you might say, wherein the Pharisees did not view First Enoch and Jubilees as having that place. So it would be pretty simple to see what the Pharisees, the problem they had with First Enoch and Jubilees is because First Enoch mentions a 364-day calendar and Jubilees mentions a 364-day calendar, and that's not the calendar that the Pharisees are following. So if that's a part of the canon, it's going to directly usurp their claim to authority. So that's not going to be a part of the canon. And so we do have in our New Testament, we do have quotes, particularly from the book of Enoch. And so the writers of the New Testament, at least, were aware of what was said in First Enoch and quoted or even referred to it. So now, and wrapping this up and then taking it from here in the next session, and from the Pharisees having a belief about the doctrine of oral Torah. The Torah is not in heaven, and prophecy ended with Malachi. Josephus testifies that the Jews in the Qumran, they were known for their prophetic giftings. And there's a belief that even there was a school of the prophets that was a remnant from the days of Elijah that was operating there. And perhaps John the Baptist, Yochanan the Immerser, was a part of that group. Okay, so now if you got those fundamental things, a Pharisaic belief, particularly that prophecy ends, so now just something as simple as this. Let's go to Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7 and verse 26. Yeshua is talking about Yochanan the Immerser, John the Baptist. And Yeshua says in John chapter 7, verse 26, but what went out for you to see? A prophet? Yea, I say to you, more than a prophet. See, you might be reading that and you might think nothing of it. Oh, yeah, I believe Yeshua is the Messiah. Yeah, I accept the New Testament. Yeah, that's not a problem. He was, John the Baptist was a prophet. Okay, great. Keep on reading. Don't think nothing of it. But when Yeshua said that John the Baptist was a prophet, he was taking sides in the Jewish religious dispute. He was saying that a prophet was valid today, where the Pharisees did not view that prophets or prophecy was valid today. So therefore, by Yeshua affirming that John is a prophet, he ain't going to be liked by the Sadducees and he ain't going to be liked by the Pharisees. Okay, so this is just a small example that I'm going to continue to give examples of, and perhaps in next session, what I'll be able to do is go over Luke chapter 1 and highlight for you what's the significance that we're told that the angel Gabriel has a visitation to Zacharias. What's the significance that even happened? What's the significance that the angel Gabriel is saying, now name him John? Why was he named John? Okay, then we have later on that Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and he prophesied. Now you might read the prophecy. Oh, great, he prophesied good. Yeah, that happens. I accept that. But wait a second, that's making a theological statement. It's saying that prophecy is valid. And where did this take place at? In the temple. Well, the temple leaders didn't believe in it. So the way that Yah communicated to them that the Messiah was coming, and this is the Elijah that you're expecting to precede the coming, it's him. So watch his life, watch his ministry, because he is that Elijah that's going to tell you who the Messiah is. But we have an account that his testimony wasn't received. Why? Because the way in which it was communicated to them, they didn't believe in. And so you're not going to see that just being told this information, this story, you're not going to see that you're being told something like major about the Jewish religious dispute. And we're given a particular angle in the religious dispute of a figure that Yeshua says has the ministry of Elijah, and a figure that Yeshua is going to be immersed of, a figure that John in John chapter 1 says that Yochanan the Immerser said that Yeshua is the Lamb of God. And so all these things are important statements to give you information about the Jewish religious dispute in the viewpoint by which the New Testament is presenting the dispute, and even how Yeshua views the dispute. And so we have to know and understand this historical and cultural context to help us better understand the ministry of Yeshua and better understand our faith and help us to better understand how we are to apply our faith in Yeshua by walking out the Torah. All right, so this is going to end session number 5, and we will take up in session number 6 from here. And so please continue to stay with us in this series, and blessings in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.